Channel 9, you're watching A News. Here are the top stories this hour. The United States has extended its ceasefire with Iran amid uncertainty around planned talks in Islamabad. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas says a decision on a €90 billion loan for Ukraine is expected on Wednesday. And Australia's online safety regulator is demanding answers from major gaming platforms over child protection. US President Donald Trump says he will extend the ceasefire with Iran until talks between them have progressed. Vice President J.D. Vance was due to head to Islamabad to head the negotiations, but the White House told reporters yesterday that he will no longer be going. The continued blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is raising fresh doubts about both sides' commitment to de-escalation after Trump said it will not be lifted. Here's more.
The United States has extended its 2-week ceasefire with Iran just hours before it was set to expire. President Donald Trump announced the decision, saying the pause will continue while Iran's leadership works on a unified proposal for talks. In a post on Truth Social, Trump also said Iran wants the Strait of Hormuz reopened to avoid losing oil revenue. However, he made clear the US will keep it totally blockaded, even as ceasefire talks continue. According to Trump, the move came after requests from Pakistan's military and political leadership. He said that Washington is willing to wait for diplomacy, but remains prepared for action if needed. The US military will also maintain its blockade of Iranian ports during this period. Iran, however, has sharply criticized the blockade. In his ex-post, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi called it an act of war and a violation of the ceasefire. He warned that Iran would defend its interests and resist pressure. Some Iranian officials have gone further. An advisor to the Iranian parliament speaker said the blockade should be met with a military response, dismissing the ceasefire extension as meaningless. Meanwhile, uncertainty surrounds a planned second round of talks between the two sides in Pakistan's capital, Islamabad. Iran has not yet confirmed its participation, citing what it calls inconsistent US actions. Pakistani officials say they are continuing efforts to bring both sides to the table.
Iran has confirmed it will not take part in the second round of talks with the United States in Pakistan that was due Wednesday, calling the decision definitive, according to Iran's semi-official Tasnim news agency. Tehran says the move is meant to fully safeguard its national interests. On Tuesday, Foreign Ministry spokesman Esmail Baghai cited contradictory messaging from Washington, along with its actions, as reasons behind the decision. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump said he would extend the current ceasefire, which was set to expire on Wednesday night. The White House also confirmed that Vice President J.D. Vance will not travel to Pakistan, adding that any updates on face-to-face US-Iran talks will be announced. A top Iranian official is strongly rejecting President Trump's indefinite ceasefire extension. Mahdi Mohammadi, an advisor to Iran's parliament speaker, dismissed the move as a ploy to buy time for a surprise strike, calling for a military response to the US blockade. Trump announced the extension yesterday, allowing peace talks to continue. However, Mohammadi stated the time for Iran to take the initiative has come. Iran has publicly displayed its Khorramshahr 4 long-range ballistic missile in Tehran's Revolution Square. The missile was shown on Tuesday evening, with state media footage capturing crowds waving flags at the gathering. The Khorramshahr 4 is reported to be one of Iran's more advanced missiles, with an estimated range of about 2,000 kilometres. It is said to be capable of carrying a warhead of more than 1 ton of explosives, making it one of the largest payload systems developed by the country. The display comes at a sensitive time as uncertainty continues over a possible second round of peace talks between Iran and the United States, which appear to be stalled. Germany's biggest airline Lufthansa says it will cancel around 20,000 flights between June and October this year. The company says this step is needed to save fuel during a global energy crisis linked to rising tensions involving the United States, Israel and Iran. Lufthansa expects to save more than 40,000 tonnes of fuel. It says overall efficiency will fall only slightly by less than 1%. The airline plans to reduce short, less profitable routes from Frankfurt and Munich while increasing flights from Zurich, Vienna and Brussels. Lufthansa says it will release the full list of cancelled flights by the end of April and has already started cancelling some flights up to the end of May. Renewed tensions along the Israel-Lebanon border come as Lebanon's Prime Minister insists his government is pursuing diplomacy while refusing to be intimidated. The flare-up follows fresh exchanges of fire that are testing a fragile ceasefire just days before talks resume.
Tensions between Israel and the Lebanese armed group Hezbollah have flared again despite a fragile ceasefire, as both sides accuse each other of violations ahead of renewed US-mediated talks. Hezbollah said it fired rockets and launched drones toward northern Israel on Tuesday, calling the attack a response to what it described as repeated Israeli breaches of the truce, including strikes on civilian areas in southern Lebanon. The group said it targeted an Israeli artillery position it blamed for the attacks. The Israeli military confirmed rockets were fired at its troops operating in southern Lebanon, describing the incident as a blatant violation of the ceasefire. Sirens sounded in several northern Israeli communities, but no casualties were reported. The escalation comes just days after a 10-day ceasefire brokered by Washington took effect. Despite the agreement, Israeli forces remain deployed in a security zone several kilometres deep inside southern Lebanon, which Israel says is necessary to protect its northern areas from further attacks. Speaking alongside French President Emmanuel Macron in Paris, Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam said his government is committed to negotiations but will not be intimidated.
Cela dit, on ne cherche pas la confrontation.
That said, we're not seeking a confrontation with Hezbollah. On the contrary, I prefer to avoid a confrontation with Hezbollah, but believe me, we won't be intimidated, not by Hezbollah and certainly not by those who are blowing the hot and cold air of civil war.
Diplomatic efforts are continuing in parallel. A second round of ambassador-level talks between Israel and Lebanon is expected to take place in Washington later this week.
Ukraine says Russian missiles and drones have repeatedly flown near nuclear facilities, including the Chernobyl site, raising concerns over the risk of a major accident. Officials say dozens of Russian hypersonic missiles have passed near several nuclear sites, including the Chernobyl plant, since the start of the war. Kyiv accuses Moscow of using routes near nuclear facilities to intimidate and potentially avoid air defences. Russia has not commented on the claims. The International Atomic Energy Agency has warned that military activity near nuclear sites poses serious risks and urged restraint. The warning comes as Ukraine prepares to mark the 40th anniversary of the Chernobyl disaster. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas has said she expects positive decisions on a €90 billion loan for Ukraine to be made on Wednesday. The breakthrough follows Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's announcement that the Druzhba pipeline, which carries Russian oil to Hungary and Slovakia, has been repaired and can resume operations, a condition Hungary's outgoing Prime Minister Viktor Orban said was necessary to lift his veto. If approved this week, Kyiv could receive the funds in May, providing vital economic relief amid the ongoing conflict with Russia. Divisions have emerged within the European Union over the next package of sanctions against Russia. Slovakia has said it will not support new restrictions until Russian oil flows through the Druzhba pipeline are restored. Bratislava has also announced it will not take part in the joint loan initiative for Ukraine.
From January 27th to this day, Ukraine has not permitted it, pumping oil through the Druzhba pipeline, which for us is unambiguously a political instrumentalization of this issue on the part of Ukraine. This is also evident from the fact that, following the elections in Hungary, we are now receiving signals that oil supplies may be resumed. We can state that we are prepared to support the 20th sanctions package against Russia, because in our assessment it will not have an impact on the Slovak economy. However, we will only do so once Russian oil arrives via the Druzhba pipeline to Slovakia. For the time being, I can confirm that we have no such information, and I have informed my colleagues and the entire Foreign Affairs Council of this. It is a political decision, stemming from a political decision by President Zelensky not to allow oil through to Slovakia and Hungary. I can only state, on behalf of the Slovak side, a completely clear position. The Slovak Republic is not participating in the loan that will be provided to Ukraine jointly with two other countries, namely the Czech Republic and Hungary. By virtue of having approved this loan at the European Council in December on the understanding that we would not be co-participating in it, this matter is closed for us. It is a question for the others. The Slovak Republic was never in a position to block this loan either. However, as regards the actual resumption of oil flow through the Druzhba pipeline, this is truly a very important matter for us.
US stock markets closed lower on Tuesday. The decline was driven by uncertainty over peace talks between the United States and Iran, as well as concerns over rising tensions in the Middle East. According to reports, Iran refused to join the talks, accusing the United States of violating the ceasefire. US President Donald Trump said the ceasefire would be extended under certain conditions. At the close of trading, the Dow Jones index fell by 293 points to 49,149. The S&P 500 dropped 0.63%, while the Nasdaq declined 0.59%. 10 of the 11 sectors in the S&P 500 ended the day lower. The biggest losses were seen in real estate and utilities. The energy sector, however, moved higher. Apple shares fell 2.52% following news of a leadership change. Tim Cook will become executive chairman of the board, while John Ternus will become the company's new chief executive from the 1st of September 2026. Now to the world of online gaming, where millions of children interact daily. Now, Australia's regulators say those spaces can also expose young users to serious risks if not properly controlled, and is demanding accountability from some of the biggest names in the industry.
Australia's online safety regulator has ordered major gaming platforms to explain how they protect children from harm. The E-Safety Commission issued legal notices to companies including Roblox, Minecraft, Fortnite and Steam. These notices require details on safety systems, moderation and staffing. Companies that fail to respond could face fines or legal action. The regulator says online games are now major social spaces for children. In Australia, 9 out of 10 young people aged 8 to 17 play online games. Officials warn that predators are using gaming platforms to contact children, often moving conversations to private messaging apps, with concerns also raised about exposure to extremist content within gaming environments. This action is part of a wider push by Australia to reduce online risks for minors. Last year, the government banned under-16s from major social media platforms. However, regulators say many children are still accessing those services despite the restrictions. Meanwhile, Roblox is facing more than 140 lawsuits in the United States. The cases allege the company failed to prevent the sexual exploitation of children. This week, Roblox agreed to pay over $23 million to settle claims brought by 2 US states. The company has also announced new account features designed specifically for younger users.
Pope Leo has arrived in Equatorial Guinea, where he was welcomed with a formal ceremony and large crowds in the capital, Malabo. The pontiff was received at the airport with an honour guard and red carpet reception, marking the start of his visit. During an address, Pope Leo warned that ongoing wars and the erosion of international law risk undermining the future and criticised the exploitation of natural resources. He also held talks with the president. A new chapter in space exploration is taking shape as NASA prepares to launch one of its most ambitious observatories yet. With advanced capabilities and a faster timeline than expected, the mission represents a major advance in how scientists observe the universe.
NASA has introduced the Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope, a next-generation observatory designed to dramatically expand our view of the cosmos. The agency says the mission is now on track for an early September launch, months ahead of schedule and under budget.
We're now targeting an early September launch, 8 months ahead of schedule and under budget.
Named after NASA's first chief astronomer, Roman will build on the legacy of the Hubble Space Telescope and the James Webb Space Telescope, but with vastly greater speed and scale. Scientists say its ability to gather data will mark a major leap forward.
Hubble gathered 172 terabytes of data in its first 30 years. Roman will downlink 1.4 terabytes of science data every day.
The telescope is expected to unlock new discoveries across the universe, from distant galaxies to planets beyond our solar system.
Roman will discover tens of thousands of new planets outside our solar system. It will reveal billions of galaxies, thousands of supernova, and tens of billions of stars.
With its wide field of view and rapid surveying power, Roman is set to help scientists map the universe in unprecedented detail and deepen our understanding of how planetary systems form across the Milky Way.
We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll continue analysing the diplomatic efforts surrounding the US-Iran ceasefire and what the next round of talks, or lack thereof, could mean for regional stability. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. US President Donald Trump has indicated that he may extend the deadline. Well, he outright said that he will extend the deadline for negotiations with Iran, expressing confidence that Tehran could still come to the table despite signals from Iranian officials suggesting reluctance to engage under current conditions. Joining me now to discuss the latest developments, I'm joined by Bassel Dewick, Middle East researcher at Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, joining us live from Lisbon. Bassel, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Now, some information has changed even since my preparation for this broadcast and for our interview with you. President Trump, well, let's start with a question that hasn't changed. President Trump has said the deadline for Iran to engage in negotiations could be extended. What does this signal about Washington's assessment of diplomatic progress so far?
So I think what Trump is trying to do here is to force the Iranian into a deal with pre-war conditions. And this is a no-brainer for the Iranians. Trump wants Iran to have no nuclear weapons, no ballistic missiles, no control of the Strait, and just cave into America's demands, especially the pre-war demands. However, we've seen that Pakistan's information minister yesterday said that the Iranians will not send a delegation and they will only come to the table if the US lifts the blockade. We've seen an urge from the White House to send people to Pakistan in order to negotiate with the Iranians. However, we've not seen the reciprocal from the Iranians. So it seems we are at a deadlock. Trump has caved in, actually, and extended the ceasefire. And what's important here is that he extended the ceasefire indefinitely. He didn't say that it's 24 hours. He didn't say it's 48 hours. He just said that the ceasefire is extended. And I think that's highly significant.
Okay, so as you said, it appears that the United States, well, Trump has caved. We were expecting a second round of talks in Pakistan. Clearly, Iran refuses to come forward. And so therefore, Vice President J.D. Vance, Washington has said, has also decided against going. So has the United States decided against sending the delegation because of the Iranian stance? How do you evaluate that change? And if or when will a second round of talks take place, do you think? And what is Pakistan's view now that this delegation from both sides is no longer willing to go there?
Well, we can start this analysis with Pakistan's position here. Pakistan is trying to bring two entities that are deeply unaligned onto one table in order to ink a deal that could actually save the region, save the Strait of Hormuz, which is the center of gravity of energy resources, and save the world from global repercussions. However, I believe that the Washington's decision not sending the delegation into Pakistan is directly related to Iran's decision not to send its delegation. So that's why we said Trump caved into the Iranians' demands, and now we're standing at no deal. There is no nuclear compromise. There is no caving in for the demands, and now Iran still controls the strait, which is not beneficial for anyone, to say the least. But I would say that this move is significant because it's a preemptive move by the Trump administration to actually exit the war and let the region resolve the issue by itself, which may have major repercussions on the U.S. standing in the Middle East, especially for Gulf states in the region.
Okay, and now some reports indicate Tehran's unwilling to negotiate while under threat of military escalation. And another development there was a top Iranian official, Mahdi Mohammadi, an advisor to Iran's parliament speaker. He said he dismissed the move by Washington as a ploy to buy time for a surprise attack and called for a military response to the US blockade. Now, is this a broader strategy to improve bargaining leverage? What do you think?
Definitely, that is a strategy to improve bargaining leverage, but also let's dissect this into two positions. The first position is that the Iranians do not trust the Americans anymore, and that's obvious. In June 2025, mid-negotiations, Israel carried out a preemptive attack against Iran, which led the US to strike the nuclear facilities later on in the war. Again, since the start of this war, we've seen that there was negotiations between the Iranians and the Americans with the Israelis attacked Iran mid-negotiations. So the Iranians do not really believe what the Trump administration says. On the other hand, I believe there are two positions within Iran. There are people that actually are against the ceasefire. They want to continue the fighting. They believe they have the leverage. They believe they can control the strait indefinitely. They believe that the US is running out of interceptors, that the Gulf states will come to a compromise with Iran under threat. And that's why the ceasefire was a big mistake. Let's not forget, Iran has the leverage here, not the US. And that's unfortunate, but that's the fact. Iran has the leverage. The US does not have the leverage in this conflict, and we've seen that Iran has the strategic depth to actually withstand all the attacks by Israel and the US. And that's the current situation right now.
Okay, let's stay on Gulf states for a moment, Bassel. Early in the piece, it appeared that the Gulf states were leaning more towards the goals of Washington, but now they seem to be leaning more towards Iran. Firstly, would you agree with that? And how do you think they're evaluating these latest developments? What are we going to be hearing from the Gulf states?
Well, the Gulf states' position is highly precarious, and let's not forget that the Gulf states in general are the most the countries that actually are losing the most from this war. Qatar has, there are projections, I think by Bloomberg, that its GDP will shrink by 16%. The UAE is under constant attack by Iran. 2,890 missiles and drones were launched by Iran against the UAE. Also, we've seen damage against US bases in Saudi Arabia, which led it to shift its energy production and export to the Red Sea rather than from the Strait of Hormuz. So they are in a highly precarious situation. However, I wouldn't say that they are leaning more towards the Iranian position. I believe actually they are more hostile towards Iran. Saudi Arabia is hostile towards Iran. The UAE especially is the most hostile country against Iran. We've seen that with official statements actually from the Foreign Ministry and the Ministry of Interior and Information, etc. So in this case, what the Gulf states see is that the US bases on their land is actually a burden than an actual benefit from them. They would like to still acquire the most advanced US weaponry, but they would feel that it's better for the US to leave their countries alone.
Okay, Bassel, that's all we have time for today. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your analysis.
Thank you for having me.
Now, after the break, we'll take a look at the key stories shaping the region. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Strains are emerging in EU-Turkey relations after remarks by Ursula von der Leyen prompted criticism from European lawmakers. The reaction highlights sensitivities around Ankara's role as both a key partner and a geopolitical actor. Adam Morrow has more from Istanbul.
A senior European Parliament official has criticized comments by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen that appeared to group Turkey alongside Russia and China as sources of influence on Europe. Nacho Sanchez Amor, the European Parliament's rapporteur on Turkey, described the remarks as geopolitically flawed in a statement posted Tuesday on social media. It's totally inconsistent with recurrent signals for stronger cooperation on security and defense, he said. The criticism came after von der Leyen said that the European Union, quote, must succeed in completing the European continent so that it is not influenced by Russia, Turkey, or China. The comments, which she made over the weekend, raised eyebrows in Ankara and in European policy circles, given Turkey's status as a long-standing NATO ally and EU candidate country. Relations between the EU and Turkey have been complex in recent years. While they have been marked by cooperation on migration, trade, and security, tensions persist over certain political and regional issues. Turkey remains a key partner for the European bloc, especially in terms of managing migration flows and shoring up NATO's southeastern flank. Ankara, for its part, has yet to issue an official response to the European Commission President's remarks. In an apparent effort to diffuse tensions, an EU spokeswoman later clarified that von der Leyen's reference to Turkey was not intended as a direct comparison with Russia or China. Speaking to Bloomberg late Tuesday, she said the comment reflected recognition of Turkey's size and geopolitical clout in the region. The spokeswoman went on to stress that Turkey remains an important economic and political partner, describing the country as an important NATO ally. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
President of Azerbaijan Ilham Aliyev met with Latvian President Edgars Rinkēvičs in Baku on Wednesday as part of the Latvian leader's official visit to the country. The two leaders first held a one-on-one meeting, followed by an expanded meeting with delegations from both sides. A ceremony for the exchange of 5 documents signed between Azerbaijan and Latvia was also held, with the participation of both presidents. In a press statement following talks with his Latvian counterpart, Aliyev said he was confident the visit would create strong opportunities for bilateral cooperation. He added that the two sides discussed various aspects of the bilateral agenda, as well as international issues of mutual interest. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said the bloc has discussed further steps to develop relations with Azerbaijan and has not ruled out expanding support for mine clearance efforts in the country. Kallas said the EU needs to strengthen ties on issues of mutual interest, including energy and trade, adding that Azerbaijan has been and remains a very reliable energy partner for EU member states. She also praised progress in the Armenia-Azerbaijan peace process, describing it as a real opportunity for the entire region. Tensions are rising between Iran and the European Union as Tehran sharply criticises calls for further sanctions following recent regional developments. The exchange highlights deepening divisions at a time when diplomatic channels remain strained.
The Iranian embassies in the UK and Austria have strongly criticised the remarks by the EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas on imposition of wider sanctions on Tehran following its retaliatory measures in the region after the joint US-Israeli war on Iran. According to the state-owned IRNA news agency, The London embassy said in a post on its social platforms on Wednesday, "Let's talk about the European highway of hypocrisy. 168 Iranian school children massacred, bridges targeted, water infrastructure destroyed. EU response, none. EU action, sanctioned the victim. This is the new Berlin Wall of morality." It added, "Iran says Hormuz Strait is open. US says it is closed and impounds ships. EU response, silence. US Navy targets Dena warship for fun. Sailors killed. EU response, silence. ICC arrest warrants for Israeli officials. EU response, visits and hugs." In a stern criticism, the embassy also accused the European bloc of double standards, saying the Green Continent has sold its honor and issued the bill to the name of the Iranian students killed by the US air raids on a primary school in Minab, southern Iran. According to IRNA, the statement was made following the EU foreign policy chief accusing Iran of reckless U-turns on Tuesday, 21st of April. Also in Vienna, the Iranian mission warned that the repetition of any aggressive and provocative action, including the imposition of further sanctions, will have severe consequences for Europe. While Tehran and EU are already at loggerheads over the bloc's triggering reinstallment of UN nuclear sanctions in 2025, the Iranian mission said any future dialogue with Iran must be conducted with a rational, realistic, and utmost respect approach. Turaj Shiralilu, Tehran, Foreign News.
Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman met interim President of Syria, Ahmed al-Shara, in Jeddah on Tuesday to discuss bilateral ties and ways to expand cooperation. The talks focused on strengthening collaboration across multiple sectors. Both sides also reviewed regional developments and efforts to coordinate their positions. Brussels is pushing forward with new trade and energy routes bypassing global instability, focusing on the Middle Corridor. But Georgia's crucial role is now in doubt due to its domestic policies. Our correspondent Nini Nikolashvili has more.
At a meeting of EU foreign ministers in Luxembourg on April 21st, Enlargement Commissioner Marta Kos laid out a clear priority. Europe is rapidly advancing its connectivity agenda, focusing on alternative trade and energy routes that bypass unstable corridors. With northern routes disrupted by Russia's war in Ukraine and southern routes affected by tensions involving Iran, Brussels is turning towards what is known as the Middle Corridor, a network linking Europe to Central Asia through the South Caucasus. But the key detail is this. Current EU engagement is actively moving forward with Armenia, Azerbaijan and Turkey, countries where concrete projects are already underway. Kos made it clear that connectivity today is not theoretical. It is about infrastructure, energy grids and functioning trade routes. Projects are being financed, partnerships deepened and strategic alignment accelerated. At the same time, Marta Kos acknowledged a critical reality. It is impossible to talk about a real connectivity agenda without Georgia. The country remains geographically essential, a natural transit bridge between Europe and Asia. In fact, EU-backed energy projects already link Armenia to Georgia, highlighting its structural importance. However, there is a growing gap between potential and participation. Georgia's role now depends not only on geography, but on political alignment. Kos noted that EU engagement can only go as far as Georgia itself is willing to cooperate. This comes amid increasingly strained relations between Tbilisi and Brussels, driven by controversial domestic policies and critical rhetoric from the Georgian government toward the EU. The result is a geopolitical paradox. At a moment when global instability creates a rare opportunity for Georgia to become a major transit hub, fulfilling a long-standing strategic ambition, the country appears less integrated into the very projects shaping that future. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Georgian President Mikhail Kavalashvili is on a working visit to Kazakhstan. During his trip, he's set to participate in a regional ecological summit. The Georgian president is scheduled to address the summit's plenary session. The forum is held in partnership with the United Nations and will focus on the growing challenges posed by climate change. Leaders from across the region are expected to attend, including the presidents of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Mongolia and Armenia, as well as Azerbaijan's Prime Minister Ali Asadov. Kazakhstan says oil shipments to Europe through Russia have come to a halt, raising fresh concerns over energy flows to the EU. Transit via the Druzhba pipeline appears to have dropped to zero, with no formal explanation from Moscow so far. Our correspondent reports from Almaty.
Reports of a halt in the transit of Kazakh oil to Europe are now being confirmed at the government level. Kazakhstan's Energy Minister Erlan Akkunjanov says shipments to Germany via Russia through the Druzhba pipeline have effectively dropped to zero for May. While there has been no formal confirmation from Moscow, the minister says unofficial data points to a complete halt in flows along the Atrau-Samara route toward the refinery in Schwedt, Germany. Russian sources, also speaking unofficially, cite a lack of technical capacity to continue pumping Kazakh oil. Authorities in Astana suggest this may be linked to recent damage to infrastructure, while this remains an assumption instead of a confirmed cause. There is no confirmed timeline for when flows might resume. Kazakh officials say transit could restart once technical issues are resolved, but for now there is no clarity beyond May. The situation is drawing close attention as the Druzhba pipeline remains a key export corridor supplying oil to Europe. Kazakh crude accounts for roughly 20 to 30% of demand at the Schwedt refinery. In total, around 3 million tons of Kazakhstan's annual oil exports are typically shipped via this route, while in 2025 volumes stood at 2.1 million tons. And amid the disruption, Kazakhstan has already begun redirecting part of its oil exports to alternative routes, seeking to minimize the impact on its position in the European market. The country has been supplying oil to Germany via the Druzhba pipeline since 2023, and until now this route had been considered a stable export channel. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Afghanistan and Azerbaijan have held high-level talks on expanding trade, transit and energy cooperation. Afghan officials say the discussions could help increase exports to European markets and boost imports of high-quality petroleum products. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has the details from Kabul.
Officials here in Kabul say a senior Afghan delegation led by Director General of the Afghanistan Standard and Quality Authority, Faizullah Tamim, has been holding talks in Azerbaijan on a range of economic issues. According to a statement from the authority, Tamim met Azerbaijan's Deputy Minister of Economy, Anar Akundov, on Wednesday, along with other senior Azerbaijani economic officials. Also present at the meeting were Afghanistan's Deputy Minister of Commerce and Industry and the head of the state-owned oil and gas company. The talks focused on several key areas, including increasing exports of Afghan products to European countries, improving transit arrangements, attracting investment and expanding wider bilateral cooperation between the two countries. A major part of the discussions also centered on energy cooperation. Afghan officials say the delegation met representatives of SOCAR, Azerbaijan's state-owned oil company, to discuss strengthening direct trade ties with Afghanistan's oil and gas company. The Afghan delegation also toured oil refineries and chemical fertilizer production plants during the visit. In the official statement, Afghan authorities said the main aim of the trip is to help secure the import of high-quality petroleum products and other commercial goods into Afghanistan. SOCAR officials reportedly pledged to increase exports of quality petroleum products to Afghanistan and to expand cooperation in the sector. Officials say petroleum imports from Azerbaijan began 2 years ago, and around 80,000 tons were imported over the past year alone. Tamim Bahiz in Kabul, A News.
A regional pact set to supercharge Central Asian trade. Uzbekistan, Afghanistan and Kazakhstan have agreed to streamline transit routes and bolster regional connectivity. Sevil Rajapova has the details on what this means for the economy.
Uzbekistan, Afghanistan and Kyrgyzstan have agreed to create a joint working group aimed at facilitating transit trade and the export of Afghan products. The agreement was reached during a trilateral meeting on the sidelines of the INA-PROM Central Asia Industrial Exhibition. Representatives from the three countries' economic and trade ministries discussed expanding business cooperation, launching joint projects and improving regional logistics. A key focus was placed on diversifying transport routes, particularly as Afghanistan continues to reduce reliance on traditional corridors. The move comes amid growing regional trade. Trade between Afghanistan and Central Asia reached approximately $2.7 billion in 2025, with a target of increasing this figure to $10 billion in the coming years. Bilateral trade between Uzbekistan and Afghanistan has also expanded significantly, rising to around $1.68 billion in 2025, up 2.5 times compared to 2021. Large-scale infrastructure projects are also supporting this trend. Uzbekistan is advancing the Trans-Afghan Railway Initiative, a proposed 573-kilometer corridor linking Central and South Asia, expected to reduce cargo delivery times and expand transit capacity. In parallel, construction of the China-Kyrgyzstan-Uzbekistan Railway began in 2025, further strengthening regional connectivity. To support these developments, the three countries plan to coordinate tariff policies and introduce digital systems to simplify transit procedures and improve cross-border efficiency. The initiative is expected to strengthen trade flows, improve access to regional markets and position Central Asia as a key transit hub, connecting major economic corridors across Asia. It is Sevil Rajapova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll look at the European Union's evolving engagement in the South Caucasus and its expanded cooperation with Azerbaijan. We'll see you shortly. Welcome back to A News. EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Kaja Kallas, has indicated that the European Union intends to deepen cooperation with Azerbaijan, including expanding support for humanitarian demining efforts in areas affected by past conflict. The EU has long been involved in supporting mine clearance initiatives, which are considered critical for reconstruction, safe return of displaced populations and broader regional stabilisation. Kallas has also emphasised Azerbaijan's importance as an energy and connectivity partner for Europe, highlighting the strategic dimension of the relationship as geopolitical and economic dynamics continue to evolve across the South Caucasus. Now, let's bring in our guest, Hussein Sultanlı, a political analyst joining us from Baku, Azerbaijan. Hussein, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Now, EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas has signalled deeper engagement with Azerbaijan, as we just highlighted in our intro there, including increased support for demining. What are the strategic priorities for the EU in the South Caucasus?
Well, the European Union has, agendas both with Azerbaijan and Armenia. It is working with both countries in several directions. In terms of strategic priorities, I think the EU strategic priorities should be supporting the normalization process, which is ongoing between the two countries, which is ongoing in the region. The EU has a lot of potential, a lot of resources that it can use, that it can implement in a region which really needs external support in the current moment. The normalization process between Azerbaijan and Armenia is entirely bilateral. However, input from actors like the European Union is essential. And I think that should be the strategic priority, and I think that is somewhere along the lines of what Kaja Kallas has been saying and said yesterday. the priority should be supporting normalization, but also deepening the bilateral track, especially with Azerbaijan, I think, because there's a lot of potential there. The relationship hasn't always been smooth for various different reasons. But I think on the political level, the sides have kind of turned the page. There's a more positive dynamic, and I think it's time for the European Union to be very clear about what it wants to do with its relationship with Azerbaijan, and how it can demonstrate in practice that Azerbaijan for so many years has been such a reliable partner.
Okay, Hussein, let's stay on the Azerbaijan-Armenia peace track and weave in the EU and where it stands there. EU relations with Armenia have often had a bearing on the level of trust between Brussels and Baku. How do you think the new EU partnership mission, with its explicit mandate to address Russian hybrid threats and wider external interference, may affect confidence within the Azerbaijan-Armenia peace process? Kaja Kallas has already stated that the mission should not undermine peace between the two countries. That's key to note. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think that this is exactly the kind of thing that in previous years and previous months has sort of slowed down momentum, both in terms of the EU's role, the usefulness of the EU's role in the South Caucasus, but also its relationship with Azerbaijan, as you just said. I think that obviously the mission is it's a matter between the European Union and Armenia, but Azerbaijan's position is that the normalization process, it has to remain bilateral, because so far to date, all the success, all the tangible benefits that have emerged have been between the two countries, of course with important input and support from the United States as well. But I think ever since the Washington summit, the two sides have been working together, and it's very important that initiatives like the mission that was announced just recently does not put that at risk. With the previous mission, we are aware that when the first mission was launched, the European Union mission in Armenia, Azerbaijan's response was not positive because it was not given warning. This was an entirely sort of EU-Armenia level decision, and it is essential to ensure that any future sort of initiative or step that may happen on the bilateral track does not impact the broader region. And there is hope that this sort of concern of Azerbaijan's will be listened to and heard in Brussels.
And now the EU partnership mission is expected to be a 2-year mission. We also know that there's already another EU mission operating along the Armenian side of the Azerbaijan-Armenia conditional border. Now, given that one clause of the initial agreement between Baku and Yerevan is understood to envisage the withdrawal of that border mission after ratification of the peace deal, what may happen to these two missions in due course? Could they merge or restructured in some other form? Could they be restructured in some other form?
Well, it's difficult to say at this moment in time because the second mission, it was just announced and it remains to be seen what it is like in practice. A priori, the two missions, they are framed in the sense that they're missions which are designed to support Armenia and protect Armenia, but whether they are merged in the future, that remains to be seen. What we can say though is that with the first mission, it was also meant for a certain period of time, but it was extended, which as you just mentioned is not necessarily in line with what is mentioned in the draft peace treaty text. For this reason, we have to see. It's early to make sort of predictions in that sense, but one thing is clear, and that is that any external interference into the South Caucasus, it has to be coordinated at all levels. It has to take into account Azerbaijan's position, it has to take into account the normalization track, it has to take into account the interests of all the countries. And with the first mission, when it was announced, there was considerable and justified concern that it's, one-dimensional and it's not, inclusive of Azerbaijan. This second one is, of course, also, as I said earlier, it's a matter between the EU and Armenia. But there is hope that, it won't have the potentially, destabilizing impact that the first mission had when it was announced, because the announcement of the first mission really was it wasn't a positive moment in the relationship between Brussels and Baku.
Hossein, thank you so much for joining us. That's all we have time for this hour. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for the analysis.
Thank you.
That's the news for this hour. Stay tuned to A News for all the latest developments.